It all started so quietly, like a murmur that creeps in unnoticed. My stepson, Dean, moved back home. Just a temporary thing, he'd said, saving up, figuring things out. I didn't think much of it at first. I was happy to have him around, as any parent would be. He wasn't the kid I remembered. Gone was the lanky teenager I knew, replaced by a young man who carried himself with confidence and charm. His smile, so easygoing, caught me off guard at times, and I'd feel a quick pang of awareness that I immediately brushed off. I'd tell myself that it was nothing, just motherly pride. But there was something I couldn't quite place, a strange thrill that sparked within me when he was nearby. I chalked it up to the closeness we'd lost over the years, convincing myself that I simply cherished him in a way any parent would. But those moments, like when he'd stop by the kitchen as I cooked, leaning casually against the counter and sharing little details of his day, they had an undertone. I could sense him watching me, his eyes lingering just a little too long, and I was hyper-aware of his gaze in a way that made me feel guilty and oddly alive. Late one evening, I'd been reading in the living room when he came in, asking if he could join me. I was surprised, but nodded, gesturing for him to sit beside me. He lay back, legs stretched out, and we fell into comfortable conversation. It was rare, even in the best families, to feel so at ease, yet here I was, feeling close to him in a way that tugged at the heart. He was telling me a story from his college days, and I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, something I hadn't done in a while. When I looked at him, our eyes met, and he just smiled back, warm and inviting. The air between us felt charged, as if we were both aware of something unspoken. I told myself I was reading too much into it. I was the adult here, the one who should know better. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I'd catch myself thinking of him, wondering when I'd see him next, what we'd talk about. These thoughts seemed to settle in my mind in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. One evening, he complimented my cooking, an innocent remark, and yet his voice lingered with something else. "You're amazing, you know that," he said, his eyes locked on mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I couldn't help but feel a blush rising, the warmth spreading over my face before I could control it. I looked away, feeling foolish, telling myself it was nothing more than harmless words. But in the quiet moments, I questioned myself. Was this normal? Did other parents feel this way, or was there something wrong with me? I had a life, a family, a marriage. The very idea of feeling something more, something forbidden, made my stomach churn. And yet, when Dean would walk into a room, I felt that thrill, a mixture of guilt and excitement that I couldn't ignore. I hated that I noticed his cologne, the way he carried himself, the softness of his voice when he spoke directly to me. I didn't want to admit it, but I was captivated by his presence in a way that felt dangerous. And so, each day, I found myself drawn to him. Things shifted after that night, though neither of us acknowledged it. There was a newfound ease in the way Dean and I interacted, like we were in on some silent understanding. It felt thrilling yet unsettling, this invisible line we were treading so carefully, never crossing but always close. Dean had become someone I felt comfortable around, someone who didn't judge me. He'd often sit with me in the evenings, asking about my day, sharing stories, or listening to my thoughts as if he genuinely cared. The more time we spent together, the deeper this emotional bond seemed to grow. His presence filled a gap I hadn't realized was there, a space that had long been empty. I started craving these moments, those private, quiet times where it felt like he truly saw me. I'd lie awake at night, thinking about our conversations, replaying them in my mind. I felt a constant tug between right and wrong, unable to resist the gravitational pull drawing me closer to him. I knew this wasn't a path I should tread, but it was as if I'd lost the will to step back. Sometimes, when he'd lean in just a little closer or touch my arm as he laughed, I felt myself instinctively lean toward him. I'd tell myself it was innocent, a harmless connection. But I knew better. One night, we sat outside on the porch, watching the stars. The silence between us felt comforting, almost intimate. He turned to me, his expression softened by the dim light, and told me I was the one person he felt truly understood him. I wanted to say something comforting, something maternal, but the words felt forced. Instead, I just nodded, feeling the weight of his gaze on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I fought the urge to reach out to him, to close the distance between us. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, and I could feel it. Every time we were alone, the temptation seemed stronger, the emotional barrier between us thinning until it was barely there. The smallest things, his laugh, the way he looked at me with that steady, warm gaze, would stir up emotions I wasn't proud of. I became increasingly aware of every gesture, every glance, feeling like I was unraveling. The weight of guilt began to mix with the thrill, twisting my feelings into something complex and intoxicating. I didn't know if Dean felt the same, but he didn't shy away, didn't pull back from the connection we had. In fact, he seemed to invite it, holding my gaze a moment longer than he should, his words laced with an undertone I couldn't ignore. It was unspoken, but there was no mistaking it. We were both acutely aware of the tension building between us. Every day felt like a game, a careful dance around the truth. I didn't know how much longer I could keep denying these feelings. Part of me wanted him to break the silence, to say something that would finally shatter this charade we were playing. But another part of me clung to the ambiguity, wanting to savor this thrill just a little longer without facing the consequences. There was no turning back now. The line between us was blurred, and with each passing day, it grew fainter, fading into something unrecognizable. One night, the boundary finally shattered. I had spent the entire evening wrestling with my own thoughts, telling myself that this tension was imagined, a trick of my mind. I convinced myself I could control this, keep it all safely contained. But when he entered the room, everything I'd been clinging to slipped away in an instant. Dean was different that evening. His gaze held a seriousness I hadn't seen before, a quiet intensity that made me pause. Neither of us said a word as he crossed the room, his eyes not leaving mine. My heart pounded, a mixture of fear and longing rising within me. I told myself to look away, to pull back, but I couldn't. It was like as though we had both become strangers.